day, viewers. Are you ready to proceed with our next and last topic? I bet you all are. For the next topic, we will understand and discuss the process of separation or end of employment process. Separation occurs at the final stage on an employee timeline under one organization. It is the final stage of all employee cycle when working in an organization. It is a natural part of the process, and sometimes it opens opportunity for the employee. Every now and then, a worker reaches the certain point created by a multiple cause. The following topics we will discuss are the core process, and it is the vital role to understand the process. First is debriefing. Debriefing, it is a structured voluntary discussion aimed at putting an abnormal event into perspective. It is making an uneasy event into a joint perspective. Debriefing will assist your employee to process the critical incident they currently facing to establish the pace of recovery. The nature of debriefing is determined by the situation. This procedure is critical for both international and domestic employees, and each group has its own set of requirements. So the question is, why do we do debriefing in our staff members? It is to ensure that there are no outstanding matter and all administrative and financial issues are settled. It means to guarantee that no unresolved concerns exist and that all administrative and financial difficulties have been resolved. Debriefing is also done to provide helpful counsel to newcomers and to obtain feedback from departing employees for the company's future improvement. Debriefing must be confidential and conducted in a safe place. It says that debriefing must be kept private and held in a secure location where staff members will feel safe and secure during the discussion. So there are 10 steps for routine personal debriefing. These are the following. 1. Introduction. 2. Identifying what was most troubling. 3. Fact, thoughts, and feelings. 4. Any other aspect you want to talk about. 5. Symptoms. 6. Normalizing and teaching. 7. Anything that was positive. 8. Return home. 9. The future. And 10. Closing.
Now that we're done with debriefing, let's go through exit checklist. There are many formalities that need to be done between the staff member and the organization if the staff member will leave an organization. These formalities can be finance, IT, administration, or HR related. And to ensure that a uniform protocol is in a place for all employees who will be leaving, there is no right or wrong way to create an exit checklist as long as it covers everything you require. The employee supervisor is the best person to complete the checklist, and it should be done on the day the employee departs the organization. To keep track of when a staff member has completed their service, a completed checklist should be submitted in their personal file. These are the checklists for outgoing staff. 1. Administrative issues, example, phone and accommodation. 2. Financial clearance and finance department. 3. IT clearance with technical department, example is laptop and email. Next is what should be included in an exit checklist. First is to collect all of their company assets, their corporate laptop, smartphone, security permits, parking passes, name badge, and business identification, as well as any other company properties assigned to the retiring employee. Next is to ask employees to clean out their desks. Also, process all pending payroll and expenditure requests. If they're being granted a cell phone account, be sure it's been reconciled. Then, disable the resigning employee's access to the facility or property. Finally, when the checklist is finished, make sure that both the retiring employee and the employee supervisor sign it.
To continue the discussion after exit checklist, let us now proceed with the exit interview. An exit interview is a private discussion between the separating employee and HR. The purpose of this conversation is to learn about the reasons for the employee's decision to leave the company and any issues that the employee would like to raise, especially something they felt unable to raise during their employment, and to make recommendations for positive change and organizational lessons learned. We recommend adopting a standard questionnaire for this encounter to make the process uniform. However, this conversation should be unstructured and fluid from a design aspect, allowing the staff member to speak freely after the data has been analyzed.
After the exit interview, the next topic will be the contract extension or redeployment. Replacing a staff member can be challenging and sometimes involve extending the mission duration of existing people. The flowchart below depicts the major step to follow while extending contracts. This is the process for contract extension. First, the country representative or senior management is consulted about a long-term role, necessity, or all the need for long-term position. Second, after gaining consent or approval from the staff member, the line manager completes the request for staff extension. It forms at least 3 to 4 weeks before the end of the assignment is due or near the end of the notice period. Third, once the form is sent to the HR and Finance for approval, the financial implication as well as the availability of funding are reviewed. Fourth, after the HR and Finance approve the form, the extension proceeds with the file extension request. And last, wherein the decision on the request is communicated to the manager and staff concerned. Now, let's proceed to some additional steering or tips for manager when the contracts of employment for a national staff are coming to an end. The first one says that when you are constructing up the function or as you build the function, you also need to consider how to quit. Meanwhile, the second one says that you need to determine the attention length for numerous style of contracts according with nearby law. Because when we say employment or anything about employment, it has law attached with it. When unemployment comes to an end, you need to ensure that the final settlements were settled and properties are returned to the organization by coordinating with appropriate support services or with relevant aid services. Next is to ensure each one personnel sign a waiver prior to departure or earlier than leaving. The guide for this one is to prepare the reference if required. Then you need to ask individual supervisor to complete them because references should be completed or finished by the respective line manager. You also have to determine whether or not employees can be redeployed or transferred to different project in case the project is closed or in case where there is a downsizing of a project. If many employees are laid off, it is important to mentally prepare them and let them know that their contract will naturally cease and will no longer be renewed. And explain to them thoroughly that it really is. When it's come to terminating staff because of terrible overall performance or disciplinary issues, make sure that the organizational procedure comply with local law and are all followed. In cases of contract extension, get some legal advice about the number of times a contract may be extended as according or stipulated under by local employment law. Next, you must keep a close track of fixed-term contract to make sure that there is no gap period between contracts. The local law in some contexts may stipulate that a gap signifies permanent contracting of the staff, which could result in an employment-related issue. Finally, make sure proper and formal communication is issued on the departure or when an employee leaves to avoid creating rumors and fear among remaining staff members that they could be next to lose their job.
Wow, that was an impressive presentation. But of course, the path of knowledge will not stop there. For the next topic, we will understand and discuss the process of the end of project or program operation. End of project or program operation. An end of project or program operation are often used by managers and their teams to conduct an evaluation how well the project progress is. Projects are often determined on the way its objectives are met or not. Every project is determined by a start and end. For many cases about this project is an issue because some employer hires a project-based employee. The Labor Code of the Philippines stands as the law governing employment practices in labor relations in the Philippines under the Article 195. Article 195 of the Labor Code provides that an employee is deemed regular when he has been engaged to perform activities which are deemed usually necessary and desirable in the usual business or trade of the employer, except where the employment has been fixed for a specific project or undertaking the completion or termination of which has been determined at the time of the engagement of the employee, or where the work or services to be performed is seasonal in nature and the employment is for the duration of the season. Example, if Axel is assigned to create a project, he or she must complete their project, but Axel and the employer will need to agree on a timeline of what they will do for the project, when it will start and end. With that, Axel, the employee, and the employer have the contract regarding that project. Therefore, when the project ends, Axel may leave or be fired if he is not a regular employee. Handover. Handover is a document written by an employee who is leaving their role either permanently or temporarily. It is designed to help whoever is taking on their day-to-day tasks get to grips with them and understand their duties. Preparing for handover. In the preparation for a handover, we follow the following process. As each project nears completion, the project managers and benefits managers should make sure that the organization is ready to put the project ends result into operation. This could imply that the organization employees will have, where necessary, new teams have been formed, been provided the opportunity to participate in the development of any new working practices, had any new practices been taught to them, written policies and procedures have been provided to refer to when new working practices become more acquainted, a supply of any new forms needed for data collection, reporting, or transactions, agreed upon roles and duties and are aware of their own and others, had the opportunity to develop bonds with any new teams. The project managers and or benefits managers will have to complete some or all of the following activities much farther ahead of the change to new working practices as possible in order for this necessary arrangement to be in place. Working process. Organizing and presiding over meetings. Encouragement of new methods and procedures. Performing demonstrations and making presentations. Organizing and perhaps providing training workshop is a potential. Preparing procedural notes and guide manuals. Impacting change. Dealing with adversity. Let's move on to another topic. When an employee decides to leave the organization under their own accord and free will, it is called voluntary resignation. When the resignation is voluntary, there is always a situation where one believes that personal reasons cannot be sacrificed in favor of the exigency of the service, and one has no other choice but to dissociate oneself from employment. This type of termination is threatened by the provision of Article 285 of the Labor Code, which recognizes two kinds of termination an employee can initiate: without just cause and with just cause. If the resignation is without just cause, the employee must give a 1-month advance written notice for resignation, commonly referred to as a resignation letter, to the employer to enable them to look for a replacement and prevent work disruption. If the employee fails to provide a resignation letter, he or she runs the risk of incurring liability for damages. Employees who voluntarily quit from their positions are not entitled to separation pay. Separation pay is only granted under Philippine law to persons who were fired from their jobs for circumstances that were beyond their control, such as business closure, suspensions of operations, retrenchment, or cost-cutting to avoid losses, and so on. What is due process? It is a legal requirement conducted to practice fair treatment and avoid an unpricing prejudice in the workplace. Due process also provides a right to an employee to be notified of the reasons for their dismissal and an opportunity to defend themselves. Due process in the context of employment termination is the right of an employee to be notified of the reasons for his or her dismissal and in case for just causes to be given the opportunity to defend themselves. The due process is different for both authorized and just causes. Just causes involves a 2-notice rule, while authorized causes requires a 30-day notice. If due process is not accorded to the employee before termination of the employment or the termination itself is declared illegal, the employee is entitled to receive reinstatement and full back wage, Article 279 Labor Code. If reinstatement is no longer possible, where the dismissal was unjust, separation pay may be granted. Dismissal based on just causes involve the 2-notice rule. 1. A written notice, commonly referred to as a notice to explain specifying the grounds for termination and giving the employee ample opportunity to explain their side. 2. A hearing, or a conference to allow the employee to respond to the charge, present evidence, or rebut the evidence presented against them. And 3. A notice of decision indicating the justification for termination as well as the corresponding sanction, if any, after due consideration of all evidence. Due process for authorized causes. Dismissal based on authorized causes involve the following. 1. Submission of a written notice of dismissal to the employee specifying the grounds for dismissal at least 30 days before the date of termination. And 2. A copy of the notice which shall be provided to the regional office of the Department of Labor and Employment where the employer is located. Termination of employment in the Philippines, unlike in the United States, which has an at-will employment principle, employers in the Philippines can only terminate their contract with an employee after establishing a just or authorized cause, as defined by law and the following due process. As a result, dismissing an employee in the Philippines is treated very seriously and can be a hard process, especially since the Labor Code of the Philippines is interpreted in the favor of the employees when in dispute. Types of employment termination. There are 2 types of employment termination in the Philippines. Termination by employer. Employers have the legal authority to fire an employee for a good reason.
Authorized causes of termination are legal grounds for dismissal that are not due to the employee's fault or negligence. Authorized causes are based on lawful grounds or termination that do not emerge from the employee's fault or negligence, whereas just cause are based on acts relevant to an employee's own improper action or negligence. According to Article 282 of the Labor Code, an employer can terminate an employee for just causes, which could any of the following: serious misconduct or willful disobedience by the employee of the lawful orders of his employer or representatives in connection with his work, gross and habitual neglect by the employee of his duties, fraud or willful breach by the employee of the trust reposed in him by his employer or duly authorized representatives, commission of a crime or offense by the employee against the person of his employer or any immediate member of his family or his duly authorized representatives, and other similar causes. Employer can also terminate an employee based on authorized causes like business and health reason. Article 283 of the Labor Code states that an employee can terminate due to business reasons such as installation of labor savings devices, redundancy, retrenchment or reductions of cost to prevent losses, or the closing or cessation of operation. Voluntary resignation or termination by employee. Employees who consciously separate themselves from their jobs for personal reasons engage in this voluntary act. It does not apply to situations in which employees are forced to quit through threats, intimidations, force, or manipulations, or if dismissal is imposed as punishment for a crime. Force or pressure designation is termed constructive dismissal and is prohibited. Termination of employment based on health reasons. Employers have the right to fire employees who are sick and whose continued employment is illegal or dangerous to his or his co-workers' health. Article 284 Labor Code. The employer must get certification from a competent public health authority that the employee's sickness is such a nature and stage that it cannot be healed within 6 months, even with a medical treatment.